Chapter 4, A Man's Availability. A man's greatest ability is his availability to God. The kingdom advances not by the strength of the capable, but by the surrender of the willing. Leonard Ravenhill. When I think about what it means to be available to God, my mind often goes to Isaiah 6:8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. These words have always resonated deeply with me, not only because of their raw vulnerability, but because they reflect a principle I was taught from a young age. Availability is the foundation of being used by God. If we aren't willing to say, Here am I, send me, how can God entrust us with His work? Growing up in a pastoral home, this idea of availability was more than just a concept, it was a way of life. My father lived and breathed it, and so did we in our own way. I saw firsthand what it looked like to be truly available for God's call, even when it came at inconvenient times. My father's availability often meant he was gone when most other dads were home. There were early mornings when he left before we even woke up, and there were nights when he didn't return until long after we were in bed. I can still recall the times he was gone all night, responding to someone in need or attending to pastoral matters that couldn't wait. As a family, we were taught that this was the cost of serving God. We had chosen to dedicate our lives to His kingdom, and that meant prioritizing His work above everything else. Our walk with God came first, followed by our service to His house. Everything else, school, sports, hobbies, came after. This was drilled into us not just by words, but by the example my parents set. If God called, we answered. No excuses. No delays. There were times, though, when this idea felt a little askew. I remember long days at the church, getting everything ready for services or events, only to have people show up who didn't seem to share the same level of commitment. It felt unfair, even frustrating at times. Why were we putting in all this effort if others didn't care as much? But even in those moments, the underlying principle remained clear. Availability mattered. We couldn't control how others responded to God's call, but we could control how we responded. If we weren't available, how could God use us? When I read Isaiah's words, I see a picture of the kind of availability my father demonstrated. Isaiah doesn't hesitate when God asks, Whom shall I send? He doesn't ask for details about the mission or weigh the personal cost. He simply responds, Here am I, send me. That kind of immediate and unequivocal surrender is powerful. It's the same kind of surrender I saw in my father's life, his willingness to drop everything to serve others, even when it meant sacrificing time, comfort, or personal plans. But availability isn't always glamorous, and I learned that lesson early too. There's a tension in living out this calling. I've seen it in my own family's experience. There were moments when being available for God's work felt frustrating or exhausting. There were times when it felt like we were giving so much for people who didn't appreciate it. And yet, when I look back, I realize that those moments shaped my understanding of faithfulness. Faithfulness, I've come to see, isn't about the results. It's not about whether people notice or appreciate what we do. It's about saying yes to God over and over again, even when it's hard. That's what Isaiah did. If you read further in Isaiah 6, you'll see that God tells him the mission will be difficult. The people he sent to won't listen. They'll be stubborn and unresponsive. Yet Isaiah still says, Send me. His availability wasn't contingent on success or recognition. It was rooted in obedience to the one who called him. That's a lesson I've carried with me. Availability often comes at a cost. It means putting aside your own plans, your own comfort, and sometimes even your own feelings. But it's worth it. It's worth it because God can't use us if we aren't willing to be used. I realize now how much of a legacy my father's availability left in my life. At the time, it wasn't always easy to understand why he had to leave at strange hours or why we spent so much of our time at church. But looking back, I see the bigger picture. His life was a living example of what it meant to say, Here am I, send me. That legacy isn't just about the sacrifices he made, it's about the values he instilled in me. He taught me that being available to God isn't about convenience, it's about commitment. I think about how often Scripture emphasizes this principle. Abraham left his homeland, not knowing where God would lead him, because he was available. Moses returned to Egypt, despite his fears and inadequacies, because he was available. The disciples left their nets and their livelihoods to follow Jesus, because they were available. God's story is written through the lives of people who said yes to him, even when it cost them everything. That's not to say that availability means neglecting other responsibilities. One thing I've come to appreciate is the balance my family tried to maintain. Yes, we prioritized God's work, but we also valued our time together. My parents made sure we understood that being available to God didn't mean burning ourselves out or neglecting the relationships God had entrusted to us. It's a delicate balance, but it's one I've learned to strive for in my own life. Even Jesus modeled this balance. He was always available to do the Father's will, but he also knew when to rest, when to withdraw, and when to invest in the people closest to him. He didn't say yes to every demand or opportunity. He said yes to the things that aligned with his Father's purpose. That's a lesson I'm still learning: how to be available without overextending myself, how to serve without losing sight of the relationships and responsibilities that matter most. Today, when I think about what it means to be available for God, I think about the different forms that can take. Sometimes it's as simple as being present for someone who needs a listening ear. Other times it's stepping into a ministry opportunity that stretches me beyond my comfort zone. Whatever it looks like, it starts with a heart posture of surrender. It starts with saying, "Here am I, send me," and trusting that God will provide the strength and grace to follow through. I've come to see that availability isn't just about the big, dramatic moments. It's about the small, everyday choices to be present, to be open, to be willing. It's about showing up, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. And just like Isaiah, I've found that when we make ourselves available to God, we often encounter his presence and power in ways we never could have imagined. Looking back on my upbringing, I'm grateful for the lessons my father taught me about availability. They weren't always easy lessons, but they were formative ones. They shaped my understanding of what it means to live a life of faith and obedience. And they continue to challenge me to step boldly into the opportunities God places before me. So now, when I hear the question, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" I want my answer to be the same as Isaiah's. I want to say, "Here am I, send me." Not because I have all the answers, not because I'm perfect, but because I'm willing. And I've learned that willingness is all God needs to do something extraordinary. Being available to God. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." Isaiah 6:8. When I first read Isaiah's words, they struck me like a lightning bolt. The simplicity of his response, "Here am I, send me," carried a weight that I couldn't fully grasp at first. But the more I meditated on it, the more I realized how profound those words truly are. Isaiah wasn't offering himself with conditions or hesitation. He didn't ask God what the task would involve or how difficult it might be. He simply said yes. That willingness to be available is at the heart of what it means to live for God. Growing up in a pastoral home, I saw what this kind of availability looked like up close. My father wasn't just a preacher. He was someone who lived his faith in the day to day. He was the man who would answer the phone in the middle of the night when a member of the church was in crisis. He was the one who showed up, no matter the inconvenience, because he believed that God's work deserved his full availability. I used to struggle with that. As a child, it was hard to understand why my dad had to leave us so often to help others. I would sit by the window, watching him drive away, and wonder why someone else couldn't step up. But as I grew older, I realized that his willingness to say yes to God wasn't just an obligation, it was an act of worship. He wasn't just responding to people's needs, he was responding to God's call. Isaiah's example reminds us that availability to God is about surrender. It's about trusting that He knows the plan, even when we don't. It's about offering ourselves fully, holding nothing back, because we know that He can use even our smallest acts of obedience to accomplish something extraordinary. This doesn't mean availability is always easy. In fact, it rarely is. Like Isaiah, we might face challenges, resistance, or uncertainty. But the beauty of being available to God is that it opens the door for Him to work through us in ways we could never imagine. The gift of presence in relationships. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Ecclesiastes 4 9 to 10. Growing up, I learned another side of availability, one that wasn't just about being available to God, but also about being available to the people we love. Ecclesiastes 4 9 to 10 captures this beautifully. We were never meant to navigate life alone. God designed us for community, for connection, for relationships where we can lift each other up. My father understood this. Even though his schedule was packed with church responsibilities, he always made time for us as a family. I'll never forget the nights when he would come home late but still take the time to sit with us and ask about our day. Even when he was physically exhausted, he made sure we knew we were a priority. It wasn't just the big moments that mattered, it was the small ones, too. The way he would listen when I had a problem, or the way he showed up at my school events, even if it meant rearranging his schedule. Those moments taught me that availability in relationships isn't about having unlimited time. It's about being present when it matters. In today's world, being present feels harder than ever. With the constant pull of technology, work demands, and endless distractions, it's easy to let relationships take a backseat. But when we choose to be present, when we put down our phones, turn off the TV, and truly engage with the people in our lives, we reflect the love and attentiveness of God. Jesus modeled this perfectly. He was fully present with the people he encountered, whether it was a conversation with his disciples or a moment of healing with a stranger. His presence had the power to transform lives. And while we may not be able to perform miracles, our presence can still make a difference. A listening ear, a kind word, or a shoulder to lean on can be exactly what someone needs to feel loved and supported. Time management. Making room for what matters. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Psalm 90:12. If there's one thing I've learned about availability, it's that it requires intentionality. Psalm 90:12 reminds us to number our days, not just so we recognize how fleeting time is, but so we learn to use it wisely. Availability doesn't happen by accident. It happens when we make a conscious effort to prioritize what matters most. Growing up, I often wondered how my father managed to juggle everything. Between his church responsibilities, family commitments, and personal rest, it seemed like he was always in motion. But as I got older, I realized that his ability to be available wasn't because he had more time than anyone else. It was because he was intentional about how he used his time. He had a way of creating space for what mattered most. He would start each day in prayer, seeking God's wisdom and guidance. He made family dinners a priority, even if it meant pushing back a meeting or rearranging his schedule. He knew that availability wasn't about doing it all, it was about doing the right things. This lesson has stuck with me. I've learned that if I want to be available to God and others, I need to be intentional about how I spend my time. That means saying no to things that don't align with my priorities. It means setting aside distractions and focusing on what truly matters. Time management isn't about cramming more into our schedules. It's about creating room for the things that align with God's purposes. When we steward our time well, we not only become more available, we also gain a sense of peace and clarity that comes from knowing we're walking in step with Him. Balancing work and availability. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Colossians 3:23-24. Work is an essential part of life. but it can also feel like a barrier to availability. How do we balance our professional responsibilities with our desire to be available to God and others? Colossians 3:23-24 offers a powerful reminder. Our work is an act of worship. For years, I struggled to find this balance. There were times when work consumed me, leaving little room for anything else. But I've learned that balancing work and availability isn't about doing it all. It's about approaching work with the right mindset. When we see our work as a way to honor God, it transforms the way we approach it. It becomes less about meeting deadlines and more about reflecting His character in everything we do. But it also means recognizing when to step back. Just as Jesus took time to rest and recharge, we need to do the same. Availability in times of need. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 6:2. One of the most profound ways to show availability is to be there for others in their moments of need. Galatians 6:2 calls us to carry each other's burdens, a command that strikes at the heart of Christian community. It's not about solving everyone's problems or having all the answers. It's about being present, offering support, and sharing the weight of life's challenges. Growing up, I witnessed countless moments when my father embodied this principle. I remember one night in particular when the phone rang late, one of those calls no one likes to get. A member of the church had been in a terrible accident, and they needed my father at the hospital. Without hesitation, he got dressed and left. As a child, I didn't fully understand why he would leave our warm home to sit in a cold hospital waiting room. But now, I see that his availability in those moments was a reflection of Christ's love. He was there, not because he could fix the situation, but because his presence brought comfort and strength. Jesus himself was the ultimate burden bearer. He carried the weight of humanity's sin on his shoulders, demonstrating the depth of his love. But even in his earthly ministry, he was constantly available to those in need. Whether it was healing the sick, feeding the hungry, or comforting the grieving, he showed us what it means to be present for others. This doesn't mean availability is always convenient. In fact, it often comes at a cost of time, energy, or personal comfort. But it's in these sacrificial moments that we fulfill the law of Christ, the law of love. When we step into someone's pain, we reflect the heart of God. Over the years, I've learned that availability in times of need doesn't always look like grand gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as sitting with someone who's grieving, offering a listening ear, or praying with someone who's struggling. These small acts of presence and kindness can have a ripple effect, reminding people that they're not alone and that God cares for them deeply. The power of saying, "No, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Matthew 6:33. Ironically, one of the most important lessons about availability is learning when to say no. For years, I thought being available meant saying yes to every opportunity, every request, and every need. But I quickly discovered that this approach wasn't sustainable. Instead of feeling fulfilled, I felt drained, stretched too thin to be truly present for the things that mattered most. Matthew 6:33 offers a guiding principle. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. When we prioritize God's kingdom, everything else falls into place. This means that availability isn't about doing everything. It's about doing the right things. It's about aligning our lives with God's priorities, even if that means saying no to certain things. Saying no can be difficult, especially when the requests are good or worthwhile. But I've learned that every yes comes with a cost. When I say yes to something, I'm inevitably saying no to something else, whether it's time with my family, rest, or opportunities to serve God in a deeper way. To be truly available, I've had to learn the power of boundaries. Jesus himself modeled this balance. While he was incredibly available to the people around him, he also knew when to withdraw and rest. He often retreated to quiet places to pray, reconnect with the Father, and recharge. He wasn't afraid to say no to the demands of the crowd so he could say yes to the Father's will. For me, learning to say no has been a journey of trust. It requires faith to believe that God's plans will be accomplished, even when I can't do everything. It means trusting that He can use my availability in the right areas, even if I have to let other things go. And it's reminded me that my worth isn't found in how much I do, but in who I am in Christ, living a life of availability. As I reflect on the themes of this chapter, I'm reminded of the profound beauty and challenge of living a life of availability. Whether it's being available to God, present for our loved ones, or stepping into the needs of others, availability is a gift we offer to those around us and a reflection of our faith. Being available isn't about having unlimited time or resources. It's about making intentional choices to prioritize what matters most. It's about surrendering our plans to God, trusting that He can use even our smallest acts of obedience to accomplish His purposes. And it's about being present in the moment, whether that moment involves comforting a friend, helping a stranger, or simply listening to a loved one. The journey of availability isn't always easy. It requires sacrifice, wisdom, and, at times, the courage to say no. But it's in these moments of surrender and faithfulness that we experience the fullness of God's grace and power. When we make ourselves available, we open the door for Him to work in and through us in ways we could never imagine. So, as you read this chapter, I encourage you to reflect on your own life. Where is God calling you to be more available? Are there areas where you need to create space for Him? Are there relationships that need your presence? And are there moments when you need to say no to something good so you can say yes to something greater? Whatever your answers may be, remember this: God isn't looking for perfection. He's looking for a willing heart. He's looking for someone who will say, "Here am I, send me." And when we offer Him our availability, we discover the incredible truth that He can do far more with our yes than we could ever do on our own. Self-talk. A man's availability. 1. Am I truly available to God, or only when it's convenient for me? What holds me back from saying, "Here am I, send me," without hesitation? 2. Do I make time for the people God has placed in my life? Am I present in my relationships, or do distractions and busyness get the best of me? 3. How am I managing my time to reflect kingdom priorities? What needs to change in my schedule to make space for what matters most to God? 4. Do I have the courage to say no to good things so I can say yes to God's best? In what areas is God calling me to set boundaries so I can be more fully available?